sands of Jordan now, close your eyes, rest your body, and let the words carry you slowly into the depths of time. The story of this land is not only about stones, ruins, or inscriptions. It is also about the very first breaths of humanity, the earliest steps, and the fragile hopes that guided people through the ages. As you prepare for sleep, imagine this. Tens of thousands of years ago, across the silent deserts of what we now call Jordan, where winds rolled gently over the dunes, the first humans began to leave their traces. The stars in the sky shone just as they do tonight. The moon cast the same silver light across the sand, but the world itself was still very young. In those prehistoric times, Jordan was not a nation with borders or cities. Instead, it was a passage, a crossroads on the great journey of humankind. When the first humans walked out of Africa and traveled north, their paths carried them across these lands. And with those steps, Jordan quietly entered the story of humanity. In the north, in a place called Ain Ghazal, archaeologists discovered the whispers of these earliest lives. Settlement remains dating back to around 7000 BCE reveal some of the first farming communities. Here, humankind was taking its first steps away from hunting and gathering, and toward planting seeds, building homes, and forming villages. The silent act of sowing grain into the earth was more than survival. It was the promise of a new future. Now close your eyes and picture it. Small mud brick houses clustered together, families gathered around a fire, voices blending softly into the night. There were no kingdoms, no armies, no cities, only simple lives, bound together by the hope of a tomorrow. In those quiet moments, the earliest seeds of civilization were taking root in Jordan's soil. Among the treasures of this age are the Ain Ghazal statues, crafted from plaster over reed frames. These human figures, with their haunting eyes and still expressions, are some of the oldest statues in the world. To gaze upon them is to look into the face of a person who lived nearly 10,000 years ago. They are not only art, but also symbols of belief, of reverence, and of the human spirit reaching beyond the present. Perhaps they were offerings to gods, perhaps tributes to ancestors. But above all, they remind us that long ago, people here were already seeking meaning in life. As centuries passed, the people of Jordan entered the Bronze Age. The deserts and valleys echoed with the footsteps of nomadic tribes. These wanderers moved with their herds, following the rhythms of rain and season. Perhaps they crossed paths with the routes that would later lead to the great city of Petra. Each step pressed into the sand carried with it not just survival, but the weight of history. Jordan's geography made it more than a home, it became a bridge. From the earliest times, caravans passed through these lands. They carried not only goods, spices, metals, and textiles, but also ideas, songs, and beliefs. Jordan was not just a resting place. It was a meeting ground where cultures touched and merged. Picture it in your mind. The vast desert stretching endlessly, the slow march of camels across the horizon, the soft call of a bird gliding overhead. The silence of the desert was never empty. It was filled with stories, with dreams carried from one land to another. The earliest tools discovered here also tell us much. Flint blades, spear tips, and simple knives still lie buried in the earth, evidence of the daily struggle to live. To hold one of those stones today would be to feel the weight of human determination, carved into the very rock by hands long vanished. Each tool is not just a relic, but a quiet echo of resilience and survival. Jordan's prehistoric people did not leave behind great palaces or towering monuments. Instead, they left small, humble traces, statues, hearths, and the faint outlines of homes. Yet these traces remind us that greatness does not always begin with grandeur. Sometimes it begins with quiet persistence, with families gathered around firelight, with seeds pressed into soil, with prayers whispered under the stars. And so, as you listen in the calm of the night, drifting toward rest, remember that the story of Jordan begins with all of us. It is not only the history of a land, but the history of humankind's earliest steps. As this chapter comes gently to a close, imagine this final scene: a group of people gathered under a wide desert sky. A fire glows softly at the center, its warmth keeping the night's chill at bay. Above, the stars shimmer as they always have. Those people look upward, perhaps praying, perhaps dreaming, perhaps simply wondering about their place in the universe. In that moment, Jordan's heart began to beat. And though time would carry countless empires, kings, and armies across this land, it all began here with simple lives, fragile hopes, and the eternal rhythm of the desert. Now, as you sink deeper into rest, know that this is only the beginning. For Jordan's story, carried gently through the ages, will only grow richer, more vibrant, and more wondrous as we continue. The fire of prehistory slowly fades, and with it, the simple lives of the earliest farmers and hunters dissolve into the past. As centuries turned into millennia, Jordan's valleys and deserts began to welcome new voices, new peoples, and the rising hum of kingdoms. Now let your mind drift with me, as though we are walking gently across the sands of time. The world is no longer only about survival. It is about identity, power, and belief. The land that once nurtured small villages now becomes home to kingdoms whose names echo softly through history. Moab, Ammon, and Edom. These names, whispered in ancient scriptures and carved into weathered stones, belong to peoples who shaped Jordan's soul. Their kingdoms were not vast empires that stretched across continents, but rather intimate realms, tucked between deserts and rivers, mountains and valleys. And yet, their stories carry a weight that still lingers in the air of Jordan today. Moab, the land beyond the Dead Sea. Close your eyes and picture the Dead Sea. Its waters shimmer with salt, heavy and still, reflecting the golden light of dawn. On its eastern side, across rugged hills and fertile plateaus, lay the land of Moab. The Moabites were a proud and resilient people. Their kingdom stretched across what is now central Jordan, and their lives were deeply tied to the land. Fertile terraces allowed them to grow grain and olives, while herds of sheep and goats roamed the slopes. But the Moabites were not only farmers, they were also storytellers. Their memory lives on through the Mesha stele, an ancient stone inscribed in the 9th century BCE. Imagine a dark basalt stone rising from the earth, covered in delicate carvings of letters. On it, King Mesha of Moab declares his victories, his defiance against mighty Israel, and his devotion to the god Chemosh. The words are strong, proud, filled with the voice of a people who believed they too deserved a place in history. As you listen, imagine the wind blowing gently across Moab's highlands, carrying the echo of those ancient words. For in Moab, we see the first glimmers of Jordan as a place of identity, not just of passage. Ammon, the kingdom of the high plains. Now let us wander north to the fertile plains near today's Amman, the capital of modern Jordan. Thousands of years ago, this was the heart of the Ammonite kingdom. The Ammonites lived where green hills rolled softly against the desert. Their city, Rabbath Ammon, bustled with life. Imagine narrow streets filled with the sound of traders, the smell of bread baking in clay ovens, and the laughter of children. The walls of the city, built from stone, watched over fields where farmers worked patiently under the sun. Ammon was not isolated. The kingdom stood at the crossroads of ancient trade. Caravans moving between Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Levant passed through, bringing goods, ideas, and distant stories. The Ammonites became skilled at balancing power, sometimes allying with neighbors, sometimes resisting them, always guarding their independence. To this day, when you stand upon the Citadel Hill in Amman and gaze at the ruins of temples and walls, you can feel the heartbeat of this ancient kingdom. Time has softened the stones, but the memory of Ammon's strength still rests in the air. Edom, the kingdom of red stone. Further south, where the desert deepens and the mountains blaze with shades of crimson and gold, we come to the kingdom of Edom. Its very name means red, a reflection of the land's striking colors. The Edomites were masters of the rugged land, stretching from the highlands of Jordan down toward the Gulf of Aqaba. They carved their lives out of stone and sand, becoming both traders and warriors. Their land lay along the route of the Great King's Highway, one of the most important trade roads of the ancient world. Picture it, a line of camels walking slowly along rocky paths, their saddles heavy with incense, spices, and copper. Merchants' voices drift in the desert air as they barter and trade, and the Edomites stand as the guardians of this lifeline of commerce. The Bible often portrays Edom as a rival of Israel, but history also shows them as skilled survivors, people who knew how to adapt to a harsh land. Their cliffs and canyons provided fortresses. Their trade brought wealth, their resilience allowed them to endure. Even today, when you wander through southern Jordan, near the rose-red cliffs that later became Petra, you can sense the spirit of Edom, the strength of a people carved into the mountains themselves. Kingdoms in conversation. Though Moab, Ammon, and Edom were distinct, their stories are intertwined. They were neighbors, sometimes allies, often rivals. They shared deserts and rivers, fought wars, and exchanged traditions. They lived in the shadow of larger powers, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, but they never allowed themselves to disappear into silence. Each kingdom carried its own faith, its own gods, its own customs. The Moabites worshipped Chemosh. The Ammonites honored Milcom. The Edomites, too, had their own deities. Religion was woven into every harvest, every battle, every birth and death. Their rituals, now only faintly remembered, were once the heartbeat of their existence. When we look back now, these kingdoms may seem small, their stones broken, their names half forgotten. But in their time, they mattered deeply. They were the guardians of their lands, the voices of their people, the keepers of traditions that still echo in Jordan's soul. The quiet fade into empires. Time, however, is relentless. The small kingdoms of Jordan faced challenges greater than themselves. The great empires of the Near East, Assyria, Babylon, and later Persia, swept across the land. The independence of Moab, Ammon, and Edom slowly faded. Their cities were conquered, their people absorbed into larger realms, and yet they did not vanish entirely. Their names still appear in scripture. Their artifacts rest in museums. Their ruins stand under Jordan's skies. They became part of the larger mosaic of this land, threads woven into the endless fabric of history. So as you lie here, listening, drifting closer to sleep, remember that Jordan was never silent. Even when small kingdoms rose and fell, the land remained alive with voices. Moab, Ammon, and Edom remind us that history is not only written by empires, it is also carried in the breath of smaller nations, in the footsteps of shepherds, in the echo of prayers whispered in the desert night. A gentle transition. And now, let us prepare to leave the age of these kingdoms behind. The fires of Moab, Ammon, and Edom burn softly in the distance, flickering like stars fatting at dawn. Ahead lies a new horizon, where empires greater than any before will rise, and Jordan will once again stand at the crossroads of civilizations. But for tonight, rest with the thought of these ancient lands of hills above the Dead Sea, of the bustling streets of Rabbath Ammon, of the red cliffs of Edom. Picture them in your mind, calm and still, as though they are waiting quietly for the dawn. And so we move gently, with peace, into the next chapter of Jordan's story. The echoes of Persia still linger in the valleys, but the winds of history are never still. From the distant lands of Macedonia, across mountains and seas, came a young man whose ambition reshaped the world. His name was Alexander, later called the Great. With the swiftness of a storm, his armies swept across Persia, and in their path, lands of Jordan found themselves drawn into a new age, an age of Greek influence, of art and philosophy, of cities rising where deserts once lay. Tonight, let us walk slowly into this chapter, not with the clash of swords, but with the quiet unfolding of culture. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and imagine the gentle blending of two worlds, the ancient Near East, rich with tradition, and the new vision of Greece, filled with light, proportion, and harmony. The arrival of Alexander. The year was 332 BCE. Alexander's conquests had already brought Egypt and Mesopotamia under his banner, and now the lands of Jordan stood within his reach. To the local peoples, Ammonites, Moabites, and Edomites, the sight of his armies must have been both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Picture them, soldiers in shining bronze armor, carrying long spears called sarissas, their formations tight and disciplined. Behind them marched not only warriors, but also scholars, builders, and artists. For Alexander's conquest was not only about land, it was about culture. And so, Jordan's story entered a new chapter, where Greek ways began to mingle with local traditions. The spread of Hellenism. When Alexander died suddenly at the age of 32, his vast empire was divided among his generals. Jordan fell under the influence of two powerful dynasties, the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria. Control shifted back and forth, like waves upon a shore, but what remained constant was the spread of Hellenism, the culture of Greece. What did Hellenism mean for Jordan? It was not merely Greek rule. It was the infusion of Greek art, language, architecture, and thought into everyday life. Cities were founded or reshaped according to Greek designs. Marketplaces, called agoras, became centers of trade and conversation. Theaters were built, where stories of gods and heroes were performed beneath the open sky. Gymnasiums trained young men not only in athletics, but also in philosophy and rhetoric. The Greek language, too, spread across the land. It became the language of administration, of commerce, of ideas. Yet local tongues did not vanish. Instead, they mingled, creating a mosaic of sounds and traditions. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, one of the most striking symbols of Hellenistic influence in Jordan, was the transformation of the Ammonite capital, Rabbath-Ammon. Under Greek rule, it was renamed Philadelphia, meaning the city of brotherly love. Imagine walking through Philadelphia during this age. Stone streets lined with columns lead to temples dedicated to Greek gods. At the heart of the city, the agora bustles with merchants, their stalls overflowing with olive oil, wine, fabrics, and spices. The sound of Greek mingles with Aramaic and other local tongues. At night, in the theater, citizens gather to watch plays, tragedies, and comedies that explore love, fate, and the will of the gods. For the people of Jordan, this was something new, a blending of their own traditions with the expressive, dramatic world of Greek culture. And yet, beneath this new Greek layer, the heartbeat of Ammonite heritage remained. Families still told the old stories, still prayed to familiar gods, still lived with customs passed down through generations. Philadelphia was both Greek and Jordanian, a meeting place of worlds, trade and the King's Highway. During the Hellenistic period, Jordan's role as a crossroads became even more important. The King's Highway, that ancient trade route running through its lands, carried not only goods, but also ideas. Caravans from Arabia brought incense and spices. Traders from Egypt carried grain and papyrus. From Greece came fine pottery, wine, and philosophy. Jordan became a bridge where East and West met, where the wisdom of Mesopotamia encountered the imagination of Greece. Close your eyes and picture a caravan arriving at a Jordanian town during this age. Camels kneel as goods are unloaded. Merchants haggle in a mix of Greek and local languages. Children watch wide-eyed as exotic items, ivory, perfumes, silks, appear like treasures from another world. In this exchange, Jordan was not a silent bystander. Its people participated, adapted, and contributed, shaping a culture that was uniquely theirs. The Nabateans, guardians of the desert. No story of Hellenistic Jordan would be complete without the Nabateans, a people who rose to prominence during this time. While Greek influence reshaped the cities, the Nabateans thrived in the deserts and mountains, building a kingdom that would one day leave behind the jewel of Petra. The Nabateans were master traders. They controlled routes that carried incense from Arabia to the Mediterranean. They were also skilled builders, carving temples and tombs into living rock, blending Hellenistic styles with their own unique artistry. In Petra, we see the essence of Hellenistic influence in Jordan. Greek columns and facades are fused with local creativity, creating structures that seem both familiar and otherworldly. The treasury, with its ornate carvings, reflects this meeting of cultures. But more than their art, the Nabateans represented resilience. They thrived not in fertile valleys, but in the harsh desert, drawing water through hidden cisterns and building a life where others could not. Their story is a reminder that Jordan's history is not only about empires, it is also about the strength of its own people, the blending of gods and beliefs. In the Hellenistic age, religion too became a place of blending. Greek gods such as Zeus, Hermes, and Athena were worshipped in new temples. Yet local deities remained strong, their names whispered in prayers across the hills and deserts. Sometimes gods merged. A local deity might be identified with a Greek one, creating a bridge between traditions. These religious fusions reflect the spirit of the age, not destruction, but transformation. For ordinary people, life still revolved around cycles of planting and harvest, birth and death, joy and sorrow. The gods, whether old or new, were called upon to protect and guide them, the quiet rhythm of life. While history remembers the great kings and cities, most people in Hellenistic Jordan lived quietly. Farmers tended their fields much as their ancestors had. Shepherds guided flocks under the same wide sky. Families gathered at night to share meals and stories. Greek influence touched them in the coins they used, the architecture they saw, the language heard in marketplaces. But their hearts remained tied to the land. Picture it, a small Jordanian village, its homes simple, its people resilient. Above the village, the stars shine as they have for millennia. A child listens to both old tales of local gods and new stories of Greek heroes. In that child's imagination, worlds meet, a land between worlds. The Hellenistic age turned Jordan into a land between worlds. To the west lay the Mediterranean, alive with Greek culture. To the east stretched the deserts, home to Arab tribes. To the north and south, empires rose and fell. Jordan absorbed all of it, not as a passive vessel, but as a living land that shaped and was shaped by those who passed through. And so, Jordan became a place of layers, where Greek theaters stood near ancient shrines, where caravans carried both incense and philosophy, where the voices of many peoples mingled under the same sky, the gentle passing of an age. As the centuries passed, the Hellenistic world gave way to another power, the Romans. But the influence of Greece never disappeared. It lived on in the theaters, in the language, in the very shape of the cities. When you walk today through Amman, Jerash, or Petra, you still feel it. The harmony of columns, the sweep of arches, the presence of a culture that came not to erase, but to blend. And so, as we close this chapter, imagine Jordan bathed in twilight. The hum of markets fades, the theater falls silent, the caravans rest for the night. Above it all, the desert sky glows with stars, as eternal as ever. The Hellenistic age, like every chapter before it, passed gently into memory. But it left Jordan enriched, layered, and forever marked by the mingling of worlds. The night is calm, and the desert air drifts gently across the silent hills. We have journeyed through Jordan's ancient past, through the kingdoms of Ammon and Moab, through the Persian horizon, and the age of Alexander's Greeks. Now, the story turns once more. The Romans have arrived. The year is 63 BCE. A Roman general named Pompey the Great marched eastward, bringing with him the authority of a republic soon to become an empire. His armies spread across the Levant, reshaping borders, binding cities into a new order. Jordan, once caught between Egypt and Mesopotamia, now became a proud part of the Roman world. Close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let us step into this age together. It is a time of grand theaters, colonnaded streets, temples carved in stone, and bustling trade routes. It is also a time of quiet daily life, of farmers and shepherds, of merchants and travelers, each finding their place under the watchful gaze of Rome. The coming of Rome. The Romans came not with sudden destruction, but with steady incorporation. Jordan's lands, already familiar with Hellenistic influence, adapted smoothly to the structures of Rome. Cities such as Philadelphia, modern Amman, Gerasa, modern Jerash, Gadara, modern Kais, and Petra found themselves woven into Rome's growing fabric. Each became part of the Decapolis, a league of 10 cities where Greek and Roman culture thrived. Imagine these cities like jewels along a necklace, each shining with its own brilliance, yet connected by the same string of empire. The Decapolis, 10 cities of light. The Decapolis was not a single kingdom, but a cultural region where urban centers flourished under Roman patronage. These cities showcased Rome's vision of order: straight streets, forums, theaters, and temples. Walk with me now through Jerash, one of the best preserved Roman cities in the world. Enter through the grand Hadrian's Arch, built to honor the emperor's visit. Ahead lies a wide colonnaded street, lined with tall stone columns that seem to stretch endlessly. To the left, the oval forum opens like a giant embrace, a perfect blend of geometry and space. Sit for a moment in the theater, where even whispers echo across the stone seats. The actors are gone, the crowds silent, but the stones remember. Music, laughter, debates, all linger in the air like gentle ghosts. This was the life of the Decapolis: civic pride, architectural wonder, and cultural exchange. Petra, jewel of the Nabateans. Yet Rome's presence in Jordan was not only about new cities. In the south, the Nabatean kingdom had already flourished. Its capital at Petra, a marvel of stone and imagination. By the 1st century CE, Petra came under Roman rule, but the city retained its unique identity. Walk through the Sick, the narrow canyon leading to Petra, and suddenly the treasury appears, its grand facade cut into the rose-red rock. Columns, pediments, and sculptures reflect Hellenistic and Roman styles, yet they are deeply Nabatean, too. Petra was not only beautiful, it was practical. The Nabateans mastered water management, building hidden cisterns and channels that sustained life in the desert. Under Rome, Petra remained a hub of trade, connecting Arabia, the Mediterranean, and beyond. Close your eyes and imagine merchants arriving at Petra with camels heavy with incense, silk, and spices. Roman officials oversee trade, scribes record transactions, and children run through the winding streets. It is a city alive with color and sound. Roads and trade, arteries of empire. The Romans were great builders, and one of their greatest gifts to Jordan was their roads. Stone paved and meticulously engineered, these roads bound the land together, making travel and trade smoother than ever before. The Via Nova Traiana, a road running through Jordan, connected Bostra in the north to the Red Sea in the south. Along this road, garrisons guarded travelers, merchants carried their wares, and officials moved swiftly between cities. These roads were not only for trade, they carried ideas, languages, and religions. A farmer in Jordan might see Roman soldiers passing one day and caravans of Arabian merchants the next. Jordan became, more than ever, a bridge of worlds, temples and beliefs. Religion in Roman Jordan was as layered as its stones. The old gods of Ammon and Moab lingered. Greek deities, brought in earlier, were still worshipped. And now, Roman gods joined them: Jupiter, Venus, and Mars. In Jerash, a great temple to Artemis rose, its tall columns catching the sunlight each morning. Shrines to Zeus and other gods stood proudly. Yet local traditions remained strong, blending with the new. As the centuries passed, another faith began to spread quietly: Christianity. In small gatherings, often in homes, Jordanian believers shared stories of Jesus and his disciples. At first, it was a humble flame, flickering in the shadows. But soon, it would blaze across the land. Daily life in Roman Jordan. While we remember Rome for its grand monuments, life for ordinary people in Jordan was more intimate. Picture a farmer near Philadelphia, tending wheat fields in the warm sun. His tools are simple, his labor steady. He sells grain in the market, where merchants from many lands gather. Picture a shepherd guiding his flock across the rolling hills. The sound of bells ringing softly as sheep graze. Picture a mother in a stone house, grinding grain, baking bread, and telling her children stories of both local heroes and Roman emperors. For them, empire was not only about politics. It was about roads that made travel easier, coins that made trade smoother, and laws that offered a measure of order. Life remained grounded in the rhythms of the land, yet enriched by the wider world. Art and culture. Roman Jordan was alive with art. Mosaics decorated villas and public buildings, their tiny stones forming images of gods, animals, and myths. Pottery, both local and imported, filled homes. Music echoed in theaters, while poetry and philosophy flowed in the cities. The blending of Greek and Roman culture with local traditions gave Jordan a unique artistic flavor. The mosaics of Madaba, though later flourishing in the Byzantine era, had their roots in this Roman tradition of visual storytelling, military presence. The Roman army also left its mark. Fortresses dotted the land, guarding roads and trade routes. Soldiers from far-off provinces served in Jordan, while local men sometimes joined the legions. These forts were not only military outposts, they became small communities where markets, workshops, and even families gathered. The presence of the army meant security, but it also brought diversity, as people from across the empire mingled in Jordan, a land of layers. As centuries passed, Jordan under Rome became a place of layers. Ancient shrines stood near Roman temples. Greek theaters echoed, alongside Nabatean tombs. The land itself absorbed each influence, preserving them in stone and memory. For Rome, Jordan was both a frontier and a heartland, frontier against the desert tribes, heartland of trade and culture. For Jordanians, it was home, as it had always been, though shaped by new rhythms of empire, the dawn of change. By the 3rd century CE, the Roman Empire began to shift. Pressures grew at its borders, and change was in the air. Yet Jordan's cities still stood proud, their colonnaded streets alive with movement, their temples gleaming in the sun. And as the empire leaned toward Christianity, Jordan would again find itself at the center of transformation. Holy places, sacred stories, and pilgrim paths would soon give it a new identity, one that endures even today. A gentle closing. As we close this chapter, picture the quiet night in Roman Jordan. The theater in Jerash is empty, its seats bathed in moonlight. Petra's treasury glows faintly in the starlight, its carvings timeless. A Roman road stretches across the hills, silent now, but once alive with the footsteps of countless travelers. The Roman age in Jordan was one of prosperity and splendor, of cities rising in stone, of cultures blending into harmony. It was a time when Jordan stood not on the margins, but at the very heart of empire. And though centuries have passed, the stones remain, whispering their story under the eternal desert sky. The night is still, and the stars shimmer softly above the hills of Jordan. We have traveled far from the kingdoms of the Ammonites and Moabites, through Persian rule, Greek influence, and the grandeur of Rome. Now, the story shifts again. The Roman Empire itself is changing. Its heart is no longer in Rome, but in the great city of Constantinople. The empire we now step into is called Byzantium. In this age, faith becomes the guiding light. Christianity, once a humble flame flickering in secret gatherings, rises to illuminate the land. Jordan, with its valleys, rivers, and mountains, becomes not only a place of trade and empire, but also a place of pilgrimage, of prayer, and of holy memory. Close your eyes. Take a deep, quiet breath. Let us enter Jordan in the Byzantine age, where stones whisper not only of emperors, but of saints, monks, and pilgrims walking slowly beneath the desert sky. The rise of a new faith. When Constantine the Great embraced Christianity in the early 4th century CE, the Roman world was transformed. Temples to Jupiter and Zeus began to give way to churches dedicated to Christ and the saints. The empire's laws, its art, and even its daily life were reshaped by this new faith. In Jordan, Christianity took deep root. This land already held a sacred place in biblical memory. The river Jordan, where John baptized Jesus, Mount Nebo, where Moses looked upon the promised land, Madaba, where ancient tribes once lived. Now, these sites drew pilgrims from across the empire. Imagine the footsteps of the faithful arriving from faraway lands. They carry walking sticks, small bags, and hearts filled with devotion. They come to see the waters where Christ was baptized. They climb the hills where prophets once walked. For them, Jordan is not just a land of empire, it is holy ground. Madaba and the mosaics, one of the brightest jewels of Byzantine Jordan, was the city of Madaba. In its churches, artisans laid out mosaics of breathtaking beauty. Tiny stones of red, blue, gold, and green came together to form intricate images, scenes of rivers, animals, cities, and sacred stories. The most famous of these mosaics is the Madaba map, created in the 6th century. Spread across the floor of a church, it shows the Holy Land in remarkable detail, Jerusalem at the center, the Dead Sea glistening, the River Jordan winding through the land. Close your eyes and picture it. Pilgrims walking into the church, looking down at the floor, and seeing the world itself spread before them. For the people of Byzantium, this was more than art. It was a sacred guide, a way of understanding their place in God's creation. Mount Nebo, the mountain of vision, another sacred place in Byzantine Jordan, was Mount Nebo. According to tradition, it was here that Moses stood, gazing across the Jordan Valley toward the Promised Land, before his life came to an end. In the Byzantine age, a great church was built on Mount Nebo to honor this memory. Pilgrims climbed the slopes, pausing to breathe, pausing to pray. At the top, they found not only a church, but also a view stretching across the valley to the Dead Sea, and even to Jerusalem on clear days. Imagine standing there at sunrise. The land glows golden, the Dead Sea shimmers, and the hills of Judea rise beyond. Pilgrims wept, prayed, and sang, feeling the closeness of both heaven and history. The baptismal site of the Jordan River, the River Jordan itself, became one of the holiest sites of the Christian world. It was here, by tradition, that John the Baptist baptized Jesus. By the Byzantine age, pilgrims came in great numbers to immerse themselves in these waters, seeking renewal and blessing. Churches and monasteries rose along the riverbanks. Festivals were held where believers gathered, singing hymns, lighting candles, and stepping into the flowing waters. For them, it was not only a river, it was the very boundary between old life and new life, between earth and heaven. Picture the scene at dawn. Monks chanting softly, pilgrims wading into the cool water, doves flying overhead. The river flows steadily, carrying not only water, but the prayers of countless souls. Monks and the desert, beyond the cities and holy sites, the deserts of Jordan became home to monks and hermits. Seeking closeness to God, they left behind worldly life and dwelled in caves, huts, or small monasteries. These monks lived simply, eating little, praying often, and seeking silence. Yet their influence was great. Pilgrims sought their blessings. Local people respected their wisdom, and their way of life shaped the spiritual identity of the land. Imagine a small cave in the hills near the Dead Sea. A monk sits quietly, reading scripture by the light of an oil lamp. Outside, the desert winds whisper, and the stars shine endlessly. His solitude is not emptiness, it is fullness, a communion with the divine. Jerash and the Byzantine transformation. The great Roman cities of Jordan did not disappear in this age. Instead, they were transformed. Jerash, once filled with temples to Artemis and Zeus, now saw churches rise beside colonnaded streets. One of the most famous is the Cathedral of Jerash, with its grand staircase and fine carvings. Other churches followed, each decorated with mosaics, each filled with the sound of chanting. Theaters that once echoed with Roman plays sometimes hosted Christian gatherings. The city remained alive, but its rhythm had changed. It was no longer only a place of empire, it was a place of faith. Daily life in Byzantine Jordan, while pilgrims and monks shaped the spiritual landscape, everyday life continued with its own quiet patterns. Farmers worked the fields, planting wheat, olives, and grapes. Shepherds guided flocks across hills, their bells ringing softly. In markets, traders sold oil, wine, fabrics, and pottery. Coins now bore the images of Christian emperors. Laws reflected the new faith. Children grew up hearing not only the old stories of gods and heroes, but also the parables of Christ and the lives of the saints. The empire touched their lives, but the land itself remained their anchor. The Jordanian sky, the fields, the rivers, all were the same as in ancient times, now seen through the light of a new faith. The sense of pilgrimage. What made Byzantine Jordan unique was not only its cities or its mosaics, but its role as a place of pilgrimage. Travelers came from Syria, Egypt, Asia Minor, and beyond, walking long distances to reach the holy sites. For these pilgrims, the journey itself was sacred. Each step was a prayer, each night beneath the stars a meditation. Arriving in Jordan, they found not just stone churches, but living encounters with the sacred, and Jordan welcomed them. Villages offered food and rest. Monks offered guidance. The land itself offered its silence, its beauty, its timelessness. The twilight of an age. The Byzantine age in Jordan lasted for centuries. But like every chapter, it too faced change. New powers arose in the east. New movements swept across the desert. By the 7th century, the armies of Islam approached, bringing with them a new faith and a new vision. Yet the legacy of Byzantium in Jordan did not vanish. The mosaics of Madaba, the churches of Mount Nebo, the memory of pilgrims at the Jordan River, all remained. They are still here today, whispering their stories to those who walk among them. A gentle closing. As we close this chapter, picture Jordan in the Byzantine twilight. The candles in a church flicker gently. A monk prays alone in the desert. A pilgrim sleeps by the river Jordan, dreaming of heaven. The air is calm, the stars eternal. Jordan has become not only a land wars, but a land of faith, where every stone, every river, and every hill carries the echo of prayer. The Byzantine age, with its mosaics and monasteries, its pilgrims and prophets, slowly fades into history. Yet its light still glows softly, like the last embers of a fire, warming the heart of Jordan for all time. The desert night is still, and the stars above Jordan shine with quiet brilliance. We have walked together through many ages, the kingdoms of Ammon and Moab, the grandeur of Greece and Rome, the holy mosaics of Byzantium. Now, the story opens to a new dawn. From the sands of Arabia, a new voice rises, a voice calling for faith in one God, for unity, for compassion, for justice. This voice belongs to Islam, and its message spreads swiftly across the deserts and valleys, reaching Jordan's hills and rivers. With it comes not only a religion, but a new rhythm of life, a new order of governance, a new sense of community. Close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let us step gently into this chapter. The Byzantine bells are fading into memory. The call to prayer begins to echo through the air. Jordan, as it has always done, adapts, transforms, and carries history forward. The early Islamic conquests. In the early 7th century, after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Muslim armies moved northward from Arabia. Their arrival in Jordan was not only a military conquest, but also the beginning of deep cultural and spiritual change. The Byzantines, who had ruled the land for centuries, faced these new forces at battles such as Yarmouk, fought near the river that marks Jordan's northern boundary. There, in 636 CE, the Byzantine armies were decisively defeated. With that, much of the Levant, including Jordan, came under the banner of Islam. But unlike the thunder of war, what followed was often the calm rhythm of adaptation. Villages and cities did not vanish. People continued to farm, trade, and live as before. Over time, new rulers brought new laws, new traditions, and above all, a new faith that slowly took root in the hearts of the people. The message of Islam. What was this new faith that reshaped Jordan? At its core was the belief in one God, merciful and compassionate. Islam emphasized prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. It was not only a religion, but a way of life, guiding daily actions, relationships, and community. For Jordanians of the 7th century, this message was both familiar and new. Familiar, because the land had long been steeped in spiritual traditions, Jewish, Christian, and older still. New, because Islam offered unity across tribes and peoples, calling them to one faith, one God, and one community. Imagine hearing the call to prayer echoing across a Jordanian village for the first time. The sound rises with the dawn, soft and steady, calling people to gather, to bow, to pray. For the farmers, shepherds, and traders, life begins to weave itself around this sacred rhythm. The Umayyad dynasty. As Islam spread, dynasties rose to guide its political and spiritual growth. Among them, the Umayyads played a special role in Jordan's story. The Umayyads ruled from 661 to 750 CE, and their capital was Damascus, just north of Jordan. With the center of power so near, Jordan became an important part of their realm, a place of palaces, garrisons, and trade routes. The Umayyads were great builders. In Jordan's deserts, they constructed beautiful desert castles, fortified palaces that served as retreats, hunting lodges, and administrative centers. Today, these castles still stand, silent yet majestic, telling stories of a time when art and faith flourished side by side. The desert castles. Let us wander together into the Jordanian desert, where the wind carries only whispers and the horizon stretches endlessly. Scattered across this land are the Umayyad desert castles, each unique, each holding its own mystery. Qasr Amra, perhaps the most famous, is adorned with frescoes, paintings of hunters, animals, and even celestial maps. Though surprising to modern eyes, these decorations show the richness of Umayyad culture, where worldly beauty was appreciated alongside spiritual devotion. Qasr al-Qarana, standing proud in the desert, looks like a fortress with its high walls and square towers. Inside, it reveals meeting rooms and courtyards, a place where leaders could gather and decisions could be made. Qasr al-Mashhada, near today's Amman, was a vast palace, its facade richly decorated with intricate carvings, rosettes, vines, and geometric patterns. Though never fully completed, it remains a symbol of Umayyad ambition and artistry. Close your eyes and picture these palaces in their prime. The desert sun gleams on their stones. Riders arrive with messages. Leaders discuss matters of state. At night, torches flicker, music plays softly, and above all, the desert sky spreads wide and eternal. Life under the Umayyads. For ordinary people, life under the Umayyads carried both continuity and change. Farmers still worked the fertile lands along the Jordan Valley. Shepherds still guided their flocks through hills and deserts. Traders still moved goods along the ancient highways. But now, Islamic law shaped governance. Arabic became the dominant language, and mosques rose in towns and cities. In Amman, still known in earlier times as Philadelphia, the Umayyads built palaces and mosques, transforming the city into a thriving Islamic center. Jerash, Petra, and Madaba adapted to the new rule. Their old Roman and Byzantine structures coexisting with new Islamic buildings. Daily life carried a rhythm of faith. 5 times a day, the call to prayer echoed across villages and towns. Friday sermons gathered communities together. Festivals of Ramadan and Eid brought joy, celebration, and a sense of unity. Art and faith, the Umayyads brought with them a unique artistic vision. While deeply rooted in Islamic values, their art reflected the blending of cultures, Byzantine, Persian, and local traditions. Mosaics flourished in Umayyad buildings, their patterns of vines, flowers, and flowing designs symbolizing paradise. Calligraphy, celebrating verses of the Quran, adorned walls and arches. Architecture embraced balance, symmetry, and beauty. In these creations, faith and artistry walked hand in hand. Every curve, every pattern, every word was an offering of devotion, a reminder of the divine presence woven into daily life. The spiritual landscape, Jordan's landscape in the Umayyad age, was not only physical, but spiritual. Holy sites gained new significance under Islam. The Jordan River, once the site of baptism, was now honored as part of the broader sacred geography of the Holy Land. Mount Nebo, Petra, and countless valleys carried memories that resonated across faiths. Mosques rose where once temples and churches had stood, but the transition was often gentle. Communities of Christians continued to live in Jordan, practicing their faith under Islamic rule. The land became a mosaic not only of art, but of peoples, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, sharing towns, markets, and histories. The Umayyad legacy. Though the Umayyads ruled for less than a century, their mark on Jordan was lasting. Their castles still stand. Their language, Arabic, remains the heart of Jordanian identity. Their vision of governance, art, and faith laid the foundation for centuries to come. When the Umayyads fell to the Abbasids in 750 CE, Jordan's story moved into another chapter. But the stones of Qasr Amra, Qasr Karana, and Qasr Mashhada still whisper of their time, of desert nights filled with the flicker of lamps, of leaders dreaming of empire beneath the stars. A gentle closing. As this chapter closes, imagine the desert under moonlight. An Umayyad caravan rests by the roadside. The call to prayer drifts across the sand. In the distance, a desert castle stands silent, its walls glowing faintly in the starlight. The Byzantine mosaics lie behind us. The Roman arches fade into memory. A new rhythm has taken hold, a rhythm of prayer, of Arabic words flowing in poetry and scripture, of unity carried on the desert wind. The Islamic age has come to Jordan, not as an erasure of the past, but as a new layer, a new melody in the ancient song of the land. And Jordan, as always, holds it gently, preserving its story beneath the endless, watchful sky. The night is still, and the desert stars shine with a steady glow. You are lying beneath them, listening to the ancient earth breathe. Jordan has already carried us through the Umayyad age of desert castles, new faith, and a land tied closely to Damascus. But as with all histories, power shifts, dynasties fall, and new rulers rise. The Umayyads have faded. In their place, the Abbasids step forward, claiming leadership of the Islamic world. Their capital lies not in nearby Damascus, but far to the east, in Baghdad, a new city shimmering with scholarship, poetry, and golden domes. Jordan, once at the heart of empire, becomes a frontier land once more quiet, distant, and yet still vital. Later, another power, the Fatimids, will sweep in from the west, from North Africa and Egypt, bringing their own vision of Islam, their own rulers, their own ambitions. Jordan will once again feel the flow of armies, caravans, and faith. This chapter is a story not of empires glittering nearby, but of how a land endures when it lies on the edges of power. Jordan does not vanish. It watches. It survives. It adapts. And beneath the sky, its people continue their lives, farming, trading, praying, dreaming, while the banners of different dynasties rise and fall on the horizon. The Abbasid Revolution. It begins in 750 CE. The Umayyads, once powerful rulers of Damascus, are overthrown by a new dynasty claiming descent from the Prophet's family. These are the Abbasids, and their rise is swift, dramatic, and total. The Abbasids move the capital to Baghdad, far east of Jordan, a city that becomes a beacon of knowledge, science, and art. For Jordan, this shift is profound. No longer near the political heart of the Islamic world, it becomes more of a borderland, still important, but not central. The great palaces of the Umayyads in Jordan's deserts fall silent. Their mosaics and frescoes fade under the sands. Without rulers nearby, Jordan becomes quieter, less adorned, but not forgotten. Jordan as a frontier land. Though distant from Baghdad, Jordan's position made it significant. It was a frontier between the Abbasid lands and those of rival powers, including the Byzantines to the north and west. Fortresses and garrisons once again mattered. Soldiers patrolled. Messengers crossed its roads. Caravans still moved through Jordan, carrying goods between Arabia, Syria, and Egypt. Pilgrims passed through on their way to Mecca. Farmers tended the fields of the Jordan Valley, still fertile and rich. Bedouin tribes roamed the deserts, independent yet tied to the rhythms of empire. In this period, Jordan was not a glittering center, but it was a vital artery, a living land where life pulsed steadily even as dynasties rose and fell far away. A land of quiet resilience. Life under the Abbasids in Jordan was often quiet, marked by continuity. Farmers planted wheat, barley, olives, and grapes. Shepherds guided goats and sheep across hills. Villagers prayed in mosques, small and simple, their domes blending into the earth. Markets still buzzed with spices, textiles, and the voices of traders. Yet above this ordinary life, history still moved. Armies occasionally crossed the land. Taxes were collected. Governors ruled in the name of Baghdad. And slowly, a shift in culture spread. Arabic language deepened. Islamic law grew firmer. Scholarship and poetry flowed even to the outskirts of empire. The Fatimid challenge. Centuries later, in the 10th century, a new power emerged far to the west. The Fatimids, a Shia dynasty that rose in North Africa. And and soon extended their reach into Egypt and the Levant. The Fatimids were different from the Abbasids. They claimed descent from Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, and Ali, his cousin and son-in-law. Their vision of Islam was distinct, and they sought to challenge Abbasid authority. When the Fatimids gained control of Egypt, Jordan once again found itself at a crossroads. For the Abbasids in Baghdad, Jordan was a frontier against Fatimid expansion. For the Fatimids, it was a gateway to Syria and beyond, a land between empires. During this time, Jordan was not merely a quiet land, it became a contested space. Rival armies marched across its valleys. Fortresses were repaired and manned. The desert saw the movement of banners, soldiers, and supplies. Yet through it all, ordinary life continued. The farmers sowed seeds. The shepherds guided their flocks. The traders led their caravans. For them, empire was often a distant word, while the land, the river, the hills, and the desert remained close and real. Faith and continuity. Under both Abbasid and Fatimid rule, Islam continued to shape Jordan's spiritual life. Mosques stood at the heart of villages. The call to prayer echoed daily, marking time with steady rhythm. Quranic schools taught children to read and recite. Festivals brought joy and unity. But alongside Islam, Jordan remained a land of diversity. Christian communities continued to exist, especially in towns like Madaba and Karak. Jewish families also lived in the region. Jordan was a place where faiths coexisted, where markets saw people of different beliefs trading side by side, where the sacred past was layered deeply into the soil. Shadows of decline. As the Abbasid Caliphate grew older, its power waned. Governors became more independent. Local rulers rose with their own ambitions. In Baghdad, the caliphs lost much of their authority, while new powers, like the Seljuks, began to dominate. For Jordan, this meant shifting rulers, uncertain allegiances, and periods of instability. The Fatimids pressed from the west, the Abbasids weakened in the east, and local leaders often held sway in between. But Jordan endured. Its mountains, deserts, and rivers continued to provide. Its people carried on, adapting as always. The coming of the Crusades. By the end of the Fatimid period, a new storm was approaching. From Europe, Crusader armies began marching toward the Holy Land. Jordan, once again, would be swept into the tides of conflict. Castles would rise on its hills, battles would be fought on its soil, and new stories would be etched into its history. But that belongs to the next chapter. For now, we close the story of the Abbasids and Fatimids, a time when Jordan was neither at the glittering center of empire nor forgotten at the edges, but a land of resilience, carrying its people forward through centuries of change. A gentle closing. As the desert night deepens, picture Jordan in the Abbasid and Fatimid ages. The stars above shine just as they did for the Umayyads, just as they did for the Byzantines, just as they did for the Nabateans long before. A caravan rests by the roadside, its camels lying quietly, their bells softly chiming in the breeze. A shepherd lights a small fire, warming his hands beneath the cold sky. Far away in Baghdad or Cairo, rulers speak of empire and faith. But here in Jordan, the land breathes steadily, ancient and enduring. The Abbasids rise and fall. The Fatimids come and go. Yet Jordan remains, carrying all stories, holding all memories, beneath the eternal watch of the stars. The stars stretch endlessly above the desert, quiet and eternal. Yet beneath them, in the 12th century, Jordan's hills and valleys tremble with the march of armies. For centuries, the land has endured the shifting powers of empires: Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Byzantine, Umayyad, Abbasid, Fatimid. But now, a new wave rises from beyond the sea. The Crusaders, Christian knights from Europe, determined to seize the Holy Land. Jordan, lying between Damascus, Jerusalem, and Egypt, cannot escape their gaze. Its hills and deserts become the stage for castles of stone and battles of faith. Yet amid all the conflict, life continues. Farmers sow seeds, shepherds guide flocks, and traders pass along ancient roads, even as the shadow of fortresses grows on the horizon. The arrival of the Crusaders. It begins in 1099, when the First Crusade takes Jerusalem. The shock reverberates across the Islamic world. A Latin kingdom is born in the very heart of the Middle East, ruled not by caliphs or sultans, but by knights from distant Europe. Jordan becomes part of this conflict almost immediately. For the Crusaders, controlling Jordan means controlling the caravan routes between Damascus and Egypt, as well as the pathways of pilgrimage and trade. For the Muslims of the region, Jordan becomes a frontier to defend, a shield to protect the heartlands of Islam, castles of stone and power. The Crusaders build mighty castles in Jordan, fortresses that still stand today as silent witnesses. Kerak Castle. Rising above the town of Kerak, this fortress became one of the most powerful in the entire region. Its thick walls and high towers loomed over the surrounding valleys. Within its halls, Crusader lords planned raids and feasts, their banners fluttering against the desert sky. Shobak Castle. Further south, in the rugged hills, stood Shobak, another Crusader stronghold. Lonely yet commanding, it guarded the roads leading toward Aqaba and Arabia. From these castles, the Crusaders launched attacks, collected taxes, and controlled the flow of goods. To local villagers and traders, the sight of these looming walls must have been both intimidating and surreal. Foreign architecture planted into the heart of Jordan's ancient landscape, the life of the people. Yet beneath the shadow of these castles, life did not stop. Imagine a farmer in the Jordan Valley, tending his fields while a Crusader lord collects tribute, or a Bedouin tribe moving across the desert, their camels grazing near distant towers. For them, Politics and wars were like storms on the horizon, loud, dangerous, yet passing. Markets continued. Olive oil, dates, and spices changed hands. Shepherds still called to their flocks. Mothers still sang lullabies beneath the night sky. Even as banners changed, the rhythm of life endured. The rise of the Ayyubids. Into this tense landscape rose a new force. The Ayyubid dynasty, founded by the legendary Salah ad-Din, known in the West as Saladin. Born of Kurdish heritage, Salah ad-Din became the symbol of Muslim resistance against the Crusaders. Calm, wise, and deeply devout, he united Egypt and Syria under his leadership. For Jordan, his rise meant hope, for the Ayyubids sought to push back the Crusader tide and reclaim the Holy Land. Jordan's castles became targets of this struggle. Battles raged, sieges dragged on, and the hills echoed with the clash of swords and the cries of warriors. Kerak under sea, Kerak Castle, proud and defiant, became a symbol of Crusader power in Jordan. Yet, it was also a thorn in the side of Salah ad-Din, who could not allow such a fortress to threaten the routes between Egypt and Damascus. Several times, the Ayyubid armies laid siege to Kerak. Imagine the scene: the fortress high upon its hill, its towers lit with fire, while below thousands of soldiers camped, their tents like a sea of canvas beneath the stars. Siege engines hurled stones at the walls, while defenders rained arrows from above. The people inside suffered hunger, thirst, and fear, while outside, armies waited patiently, knowing time itself was a weapon. In 1183, during one such siege, it is said that a wedding was taking place inside the castle. Salah ad-Din, upon learning this, ordered his men not to attack the chamber where the bride and groom were celebrating. Such mercy became part of his legend, showing that even in war, compassion could still find a place. The turning tide, the struggle between Crusaders and Ayyubids, was long and fierce. Yet slowly, the balance shifted. Salah ad-Din's leadership, his patience, and his vision brought victories. In 1187, he achieved his greatest triumph, the recapture of Jerusalem after the famous Battle of Hattin. For Jordan, this was a moment of transformation. The Crusader castles, once strongholds of power, began to weaken. One by one, they fell into Ayyubid hands. Shobek, Kerak, and others eventually yielded. The banners of Europe were lowered, and the crescent of Islam rose once again. The Ayyubid legacy. Under the Ayyubids, Jordan found a new balance. The castles once filled with Crusader lords now housed Muslim garrisons. The land remained a frontier, but a frontier watched by leaders who sought stability. Salah ad-Din's dynasty valued learning, justice, and faith. Though Jordan was not the heart of their empire, it benefited from their vision. Trade revived, roads became safer, and pilgrims once more passed through on their journeys. The land still bore scars of war, burned villages, damaged ravaged fields, crumbling walls. But slowly, healing began. Echoes of stone. Even today, the castles of Jordan stand as echoes of this age. Their stones are weathered, their halls empty, their towers silent. Yet, if you walk through Kerak or Shobek, you can still feel the presence of history. The Crusader knights, the Ayyubid warriors, the merchants, the villagers. Each stone carries a memory. Each wall whispers a story. And the land, as always, has endured, watching kingdoms rise and fall, yet remaining steady beneath the eternal sky. A gentle transition. As the chapter closes, picture the scene. The Crusader banners are lowered. The Ayyubid crescent rises. The clash of swords fades into silence. Now the desert wind moves softly through the valleys. The castles, once loud with battle, are quiet under the moonlight. Farmers return to their fields. Shepherds sing to their flocks. Traders once again lead caravans across the roads. The storm of the Crusades has passed, and Jordan, though scarred, endures. Ahead lies another age. The rise of the Mamluks, fierce warriors, who would guard these lands and build their own legacy upon the ruins of the past. The moon glows softly over the desert, and the stars scatter like jewels across the endless sky. In this stillness, let us return to Jordan in the 13th century. The time of crusaders has faded. The castles they razed stand battered, some taken by the Ayyubids, some lying in ruins. Salah ad-Din's legacy lingers, his vision still alive in the hearts of many. But history never rests. A new force now rises in the Islamic world, born from unusual beginnings. They are called the Mamluks, warriors of foreign birth, once enslaved, but trained with iron discipline. From slaves, they became soldiers. From soldiers, they became rulers. And soon, they would shape Jordan's destiny. The birth of the Mamluks. The word Mamluk means owned. These men were originally brought from distant lands, Turks, Circassians, Mongols taken as young boys, converted to Islam, and trained to fight with unmatched skill. In Egypt, the Mamluks rose first as guardians of their masters, then as defenders of the realm. Their discipline, loyalty, and strength made them indispensable. Over time, they gained power until in 1250, they seized it fully, founding the Mamluk Sultanate in Cairo. For the world, this was extraordinary. Slaves had become rulers, and their empire would endure for centuries. For Jordan, it meant a new chapter, as the land came under their care and watch. Jordan at the crossroads, once more. Jordan has always been a land between lands, a bridge, a passage, a frontier. Under the Mamluks, this truth grew even stronger. To the north lay Syria, with Damascus as a key city. To the south lay Mecca and Medina, holy cities for pilgrims. To the west lay Palestine and Jerusalem. To the east stretched the deserts, home to tribes and caravans. Jordan sat at the meeting point of all these directions. For the Mamluks, this made it essential. Whoever controlled Jordan controlled the routes of trade, of pilgrimage, and of armies. The Mongol threat, not long after the Mamluks rose to power, a terrifying storm swept across Asia, the Mongols. Their armies seemed unstoppable, burning cities, toppling kingdoms, spreading fear wherever they went. In 1260, the Mongols reached as far as Syria. For a moment, it seemed they would consume the entire Middle East. But then, in the Battle of Ain Jalut, the Mamluks defeated them. It was one of history's turning points, proving that even the mightiest empire could be stopped. For Jordan, this victory was vital. The Mongol tide was pushed back, and the land was spared the devastation that had struck so many other regions. Instead of fire and ruin, Jordan entered a period of guarded stability under Mamluk rule. Castles and fortresses revived. The Mamluks understood the importance of Jordan's castles. They repaired old fortresses, Kerak, Shobak, Ajlon, strengthening them for new threats. These stone guardians watched the roads, protecting trade routes and shielding pilgrims. Kerak, perched high above its valley, once filled with Crusader knights, now echoed with the steps of Mamluk soldiers. Ajlon, built earlier by Salah ad-Din, was fortified anew, guarding the northern approaches against possible invasions. Shobak, lonely in the southern hills, was mended and kept alive. Each fortress stood not only as military posts, but also as symbols. Jordan was defended. Jordan was protected. Jordan was part of something larger. Pilgrimage and the Hajj routes. One of the Mamluks' greatest responsibilities was the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. Every year, thousands of Muslims from across the world passed through Jordan on their sacred journey. The Mamluks built caravanserais, resting stations along the way, where pilgrims could find water, food, and safety. Wells were dug, roads were repaired, guards were assigned. Jordan became not just a passage, but a carefully maintained path of devotion. Imagine the scene. A caravan of pilgrims moving through the desert, hundreds of camels carrying travelers, their voices rising in prayer as they journey south. Along the road, Mamluk guards stand watch, ensuring their safety. The land itself seems to join in their devotion, the mountains and valleys echoing their sacred songs. Trade and life under the Mamluks. Beyond pilgrimage, Jordan thrived as part of the Mamluk trade network. Goods from Arabia, Egypt, and Syria passed through its roads. Spices, silks, and perfumes traveled north and west, while grain, textiles, and other goods flowed south. Villages and towns grew modestly, sustained by this commerce. Markets bustled, mosques stood at their hearts, and communities lived in relative stability. Farmers continued to cultivate the fertile Jordan Valley. Shepherds grazed their flocks on the rolling hills. Bedouin tribes moved across the deserts, their lives tied to the rhythms of seasons. Jordan was never the glittering center of the Mamluk world that belonged to Cairo and Damascus, but it was steady, vital and enduring, a land that connected, a land that provided the rhythm of faith. Under Mamluk rule, religion was not only preserved, but nurtured. Mosques were built, Quranic schools thrived, and scholars traveled between Cairo, Damascus, and beyond. Jordan's towns may have been small, but they pulsed with the same devotion that filled the greater Islamic world. Christian and Jewish communities also continued, living in villages and towns, contributing to the fabric of daily life. Jordan remained a land where faiths coexisted, where trade and neighborly ties bound people together more strongly than divisions. A land of watchful silence. As centuries passed, Jordan under the Mamluks remained much the same. A guarded land, a land of passage, a land of resilience. Armies marched across it at times, but often it was simply the sound of caravans, pilgrims, and shepherds that filled the valleys. The castles stood like silent watchers. The desert winds whispered through their stone halls. The people lived quietly, enduring and steady. For Jordan, this was not an age of glittering palaces or vast conquests. It was an age of guardianship, the watchful care of a land that mattered not because of its riches, but because of its position, its roads, and its enduring spirit. The decline of the Mamluks. By the 15th century, however, the Mamluk Sultanate began to weaken. Corruption crept into its rulers. The strength of its armies diminished. Trade routes shifted as new paths by sea opened between Europe and Asia. Jordan, tied to their fate, felt this decline too. The castles were still manned, but less firmly. The roads were still guarded, but less securely. The world was changing, and the Mamluks struggled to keep pace. Eventually, in 1517, a new power would rise to claim their place. The Ottoman Empire, sweeping from Anatolia, bringing Jordan into yet another chapter of history, a gentle closing. And so, as this chapter ends, picture Jordan under the Mamluks. The night sky above is filled with stars. Below, a caravan rests at a roadside inn, its camels quiet, its travelers sleeping in peace. A Mamluk guard stands watch, spear in hand, his silhouette outlined by the moon. The castles loom in the distance, their stones silver in the starlight. The land is calm, watchful, and enduring. The Mamluks came as guardians, and for centuries they held the crossroads, protecting pilgrims, watching over roads, and keeping Jordan tied to the greater world. But time moves on, and soon new banners will rise. The Ottomans are on the horizon, and Jordan will once again adapt, endure, and continue beneath the eternal desert sky. The desert wind sighs across the hills of Jordan, carrying with it the scent of earth, stone, and time. The castles of the Mamluks still stand on their high ridges, their stones weathered by sun and rain, their halls echoing with silence. The world has shifted once again. It is the year 1517. the great battle has been fought, and the banners of the Ottoman Empire now rise across the Middle East. The Mamluks, once guardians of Jordan, have been defeated. A new dynasty, born in Anatolia, stretches its reach across 3 continents. For Jordan, this is the beginning of 4 centuries of Ottoman rule. Unlike the dramatic sieges of Crusaders or the fiery storms of Mongols, the Ottoman period would not be marked by constant battles. Instead, it would be remembered for its long, steady presence. Quiet, enduring, and sometimes distant. The coming of the Ottomans. The Ottomans entered Jordan as part of their sweeping conquest of the Mamluk lands. Their empire was vast, stretching from the Balkans in Europe, across Anatolia, through Syria and Egypt, and deep into Arabia and North Africa. Jordan was a small piece of this enormous puzzle. Not a capital, not a glittering city, not a center of empire, but a frontier province, important for its location on the routes of pilgrimage and trade. The Ottomans divided their empire into provinces called vilayets and sanjaks, each ruled by governors. Jordan was tied administratively to Damascus and later to other regional centers. Decisions were made far away, but the effects reached the valleys, villages, and deserts of Jordan. Life under Ottoman rule. For the people of Jordan, life under the Ottomans was a mixture of continuity and change. Villagers worked their land, as they always had, planting wheat and barley, tending olives and figs, keeping goats and sheep. Bedouin tribes roamed the deserts, guiding their camels, moving with the seasons, keeping their independence, yet living under the shadow of empire. Townsfolk lived in modest communities, gathering in markets, praying in mosques, trading with travelers who passed through. Taxes were collected by local officials on behalf of the Ottomans. Sometimes these taxes were fair, sometimes heavy. At times, tribal uprisings broke out, resisting distant rulers. Yet, for much of the 4 centuries, Jordan lived in relative quiet. The pilgrimage roads, perhaps the most important role Jordan played in the Ottoman era, was as a guardian of the Hajj routes. Each year, pilgrims from across the empire traveled to Mecca. From Damascus, one of the great pilgrimage caravans set forth, moving south through Jordan. The Ottomans invested in protecting this journey. Forts and way stations were repaired or built. Wells were dug deeper. Caravanserais offered resting places for travelers. Soldiers marched alongside the caravans, ensuring safety from bandits or tribal raids. Imagine the sight. A sea of pilgrims stretching across the desert, camels laden with supplies, banners fluttering in the wind, voices rising in prayer. Along the way, the people of Jordan watched and sometimes joined, offering food, water, and shelter. The pilgrimage brought life, trade, and connection to the land. Year after year, castles in a new age. The great castles of Kerak, Shobek, and Ajlon still stood under the Ottomans. Their walls, once built by crusaders and fortified by Mamluks, were now used as garrisons, storage, or administrative centers, but their military glory had faded. Gunpowder and cannons had changed the art of war, making such medieval fortresses less vital. Instead, they became part of the quiet rhythm of provincial life, looming reminders of Jordan's turbulent past, now resting in a calmer present. Religion and community. The Ottomans were Muslims, guided by Islamic law, but their empire was diverse. In Jordan, Islam remained the dominant faith, shaping daily life in towns and villages. Mosques stood at the heart of communities, the call to prayer marking the hours of the day, the rhythms of worship steady and familiar. Christian communities also endured, especially in towns like Madaba and Salt. They lived under the protection of the Ottomans, paying special taxes, but allowed to practice their faith. Jewish families, too, were part of the social fabric. Jordan remained a land of coexistence, its faiths layered like the stones of its old cities. Moments of struggle, though mostly quiet, Ottoman rule was not without hardship. At times, heavy taxation or neglect stirred unrest. Tribal groups sometimes rose against Ottoman officials, refusing to pay tribute or resisting control. The harshness of the desert, the difficulty of farming in dry lands, the distance from imperial centers, all made life in Jordan challenging. Yet the people endured, as they always had. They bent without breaking. They adapted without losing themselves. The 19th century, change on the horizon. For centuries, Jordan remained on the quieter edges of empire. But by the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire itself was weakening. European powers grew stronger, and the Ottomans struggled to modernize. Jordan began to feel these shifts. New roads were planned. The famous Hijaz Railway, begun in the early 20th century, was built to connect Damascus to Medina, passing through Jordan. It was intended to strengthen the empire and ease the pilgrimage, but it also brought new attention to a land that had long been overlooked. The whisper of independence. By the early 20th century, the Ottomans were in decline. Nationalist movements rose across the Arab world. Jordan, though still quiet, felt the winds of change. Tribal leaders began to speak of autonomy. Young men looked to new futures. World War I became the breaking point. The Ottoman Empire, allied with Germany, was defeated. The Arab Revolt, supported by Sharif Hussein of Mecca, and aided by the famous figure T.E. Lawrence, stirred across the deserts. Jordan became part of this story, its valleys and towns, witnessing the march of Arab fighters and the retreat of Ottoman garrisons. In 1918, the Ottomans withdrew. After 4 centuries, their banners no longer flew over Jordan. The land, once again, stood at the threshold of a new age, a gentle reflection. As you rest beneath the stars, think of Jordan during the long Ottoman centuries. Not a land of grand battles, not a land of glittering courts, but a land of steady endurance. A farmer in the Jordan Valley, harvesting wheat under the sun. A Bedouin tribe resting by their tents. The desert stretching endless around them. A caravan of pilgrims moving southward. Voices rising in prayer, guarded by Ottoman soldiers. A small mosque in a quiet town. The call to prayer echoing against stone walls. This was Jordan in the Ottoman age. Steady, enduring, patient. A soft transition. Now, as the night deepens, the story shifts once more. The Ottomans have departed. The land of Jordan is caught in the uncertainty of the modern world. New borders will be drawn. New rulers will arrive, and a new nation will be born. Ahead lies the story of the 20th century, when Jordan transforms from quiet provinces into a kingdom, finding its place among modern nations. But for now, let us rest with the image of Jordan under the Ottomans. Quiet villages, watchful castles, endless deserts, and a people enduring calmly through 4 centuries of history. The desert was quiet in the early dawn. The long centuries of Ottoman rule had ended, their banners lowered, their soldiers withdrawn. Across the Middle East, a new wind was blowing, one of rebellion, hope, and uncertainty. Jordan, long a land of crossroads, now stood on the threshold of becoming something new. Not just a province, not just a passageway, but a nation of its own. The Arab Revolt. The story begins with the Arab Revolt of 1916, when Sharif Hussein of Mecca raised the banner of independence against the Ottoman Empire. His dream was of a great Arab kingdom stretching across the Fertile Crescent, a homeland for Arab peoples long ruled by distant empires. In Jordan, tribes and towns joined this cause. The desert paths carried riders who fought under the sun, their loyalty to Arab independence burning bright. The British, seeking to weaken the Ottomans during World War I, supported the revolt. A figure known to the world as *T. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, *** rode, alongside Arab fighters, guiding, planning, and sometimes simply observing the courage of men who knew the desert better than any foreigner could. Jordan's land became part of this epic struggle. Battles flared near Aqaba, Man, and the Hijaz Railway. When the war ended in 1918, the Ottomans were gone. For the first time in centuries, the people of Jordan looked not to Istanbul, but to their own land and leaders, the Mandate and the Hashemites. Yet independence was not simple. The great powers of Europe, Britain and France, had already drawn secret lines across the Middle East. Promises made to Arabs were set aside in the shadow of agreements like the Sykes-Picot Accord. Instead of one united Arab kingdom, new territories were divided, overseen by European powers under what was called the Mandate system. Jordan fell under the British Mandate, though it was not yet called Jordan. At first, the land was known as Transjordan, the region east of the Jordan River. In 1921, A new chapter began with the arrival of Emir Abdullah, son of Sharif Hussein. With British support, Abdullah established his rule in Amman, creating the Emirate of Transjordan. It was a land still small, still modest, but the seeds of nationhood had been planted, a nation taking shape. The early decades of the 20th century were times of slow, careful building. Emir Abdullah worked to bring tribes together, to strengthen unity, to create institutions where none had existed before. Roads were laid, schools were founded. A small army, the Arab Legion, was formed under British guidance. Amman, once a sleepy town, began to grow into a capital. Other towns, Salt, Irbid, Man linked into the fabric of a rising state. The people of Jordan were not yet many in number, but their spirit was steady. In 1946, after World War II, the moment of independence came. Transjordan was recognized as a sovereign kingdom. Abdullah became King Abdullah I, the first ruler of what would soon be called the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. The question of Palestine, yet Jordan's story, was deeply tied to the struggles of its neighbors. In 1948, the creation of the State of Israel brought war to the region. Thousands of Palestinians fled across the Jordan River, seeking refuge. Many made Jordan their new home, joining the fabric of society, their stories forever part of Jordan's own. The Jordanian army fought in the War of 1948, known to Arabs as the Nakba, the catastrophe. In its aftermath, Jordan came to control the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, home to holy sites that carried the prayers of Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. Jordan had grown suddenly larger, its people more diverse, its challenges greater. Yet the kingdom endured. Kings and transitions. In 1951, tragedy struck. King Abdullah I was assassinated in Jerusalem. His life ended at the gates of Al-Aqsa Mosque. His grandson, Hussein, only a teenager at the time, would later ascend the throne after a brief regency. King Hussein would go on to rule Jordan for nearly half a century, guiding his nation through storms of conflict, waves of refugees, and the shifting sands of regional politics. His reign became one of resilience and survival. Jordan, in a turbulent region, the mid-20th century, was a time of turmoil for the Middle East. Wars erupted in 1956, 1967, and 1973. The Six-Day War of 1967 was especially devastating. Jordan lost the West Bank and East Jerusalem to Israel. The loss of Jerusalem was a heavy blow, and yet Jordan continued, its people adapting once again to a difficult reality. The years that followed brought both hardship and rebuilding. Waves of refugees arrived again after wars, settling in camps that grew into communities. Jordan's economy struggled, but its society showed resilience. Through all this, King Hussein worked tirelessly, balancing diplomacy and survival, seeking peace where he could. protecting his people as best as possible in a region of constant upheaval. The path to peace. In the 1990s, as the world shifted after the Cold War, Jordan made a bold move. In 1994, King Hussein signed a peace treaty with Israel, making Jordan the second Arab nation after Egypt to do so. It was a controversial decision, but one rooted in the hope of stability, of security, of a future less burdened by war. Peace did not solve every problem, but it brought a quieter border, new opportunities, and international recognition of Jordan's role as a mediator, and a voice of reason in a divided region, a modern kingdom. When King Hussein passed away in 1999, his son, King Abdullah II, took the throne. Under his leadership, Jordan has sought to modernize, to adapt to a fast-changing world, while also holding firmly to its traditions. Today, Jordan is known not for riches of oil or vast armies, but for its stability in a region often shaken by conflict. It is a land of hospitality, where refugees from many wars, Palestinians, Iraqis, Syrians, have found shelter. It is a land of ancient wonders, from Petra to Jerash, where history whispers through stone. It is a land of quiet strength, its deserts and valleys holding the memory of countless civilizations. A gentle reflection. As you lie back and listen, think of Jordan's journey, from the prehistoric villages of Ain Ghazal to the Nabatean kingdom of Petra, to the Roman cities that once glittered under the sun, through the storms of crusaders and the watchful towers of Mamluks, through the long quiet of the Ottoman centuries, to the rising of a modern kingdom, steady and enduring. Jordan is not a vast empire. It is not a land of endless wealth, but it is a land of survival, of continuity, of quiet resilience, closing the circle. And so the story comes full circle. The people of Jordan, who once watched empires rise and fall around them, now live in a nation of their own. The Hashemite kingdom stands, small yet strong, a bridge between past and future, between tradition and change. The desert wind still sighs over the hills. The stars still shine over Petra, over Amman, over the Jordan Valley. And the story of this land, like the flow of the river itself, continues onward, calm, patient, eternal. The desert was quiet in the early dawn. The long centuries of Ottoman rule had ended, their banners lowered, their soldiers withdrawn. Across the Middle East, a new wind was blowing, one of rebellion, hope, and uncertainty. Jordan, long a land of crossroads, now stood on the threshold of becoming something new. Not just a province, not just a passageway, but a nation of its own. The Arab Revolt. The story begins with the Arab Revolt of 1916, when Sharif Hussein of Mecca raised the banner of independence against the Ottoman Empire. His dream was of a great Arab kingdom stretching across the Fertile Crescent, a homeland for Arab peoples long ruled by distant empires. In Jordan, tribes and towns joined this cause. The desert paths carried riders who fought under the sun, their loyalty to Arab independence burning bright. The British, seeking to weaken the Ottomans during World War I, supported the revolt. A figure known to the world as *T. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, *** rode, alongside Arab fighters, guiding, planning, and sometimes simply observing the courage of men who knew the desert better than any foreigner could. Jordan's land became part of this epic struggle. Battles flared near Aqaba, Man, and the Hijaz Railway. When the war ended in 1918, the Ottomans were gone. For the first time in centuries, the people of Jordan looked not to Istanbul, but to their own land and leaders, the Mandate and the Hashemites. Yet independence was not simple. The great powers of Europe, Britain and France, had already drawn secret lines across the Middle East. Promises made to Arabs were set aside in the shadow of agreements like the Sykes-Picot Accord. Instead of one united Arab kingdom, new territories were divided, overseen by European powers under what was called the Mandate system. Jordan fell under the British Mandate, though it was not yet called Jordan. At first, the land was known as Transjordan, the region east of the Jordan River. In 1921, a new chapter began with the arrival of Emir Abdullah, son of Sharif Hussein. With British support, Abdullah established his rule in Amman, creating the Emirate of Transjordan. It was a land still small, still modest, but the seeds of nationhood had been planted, a nation taking shape. The early decades of the 20th century were times of slow, careful building. Emir Abdullah worked to bring tribes together, to strengthen unity, to create institutions where none had existed before. Roads were laid, schools were founded. A small army, the Arab Legion, was formed under British guidance. Amman, once a sleepy town, began to grow into a capital. Other towns, Salt, Irbid, Man, linked into the fabric of a rising state. The people of Jordan were not yet many in number, but their spirit was steady. In 1946, after World War II, the moment of independence came. Transjordan was recognized as a sovereign kingdom. Abdullah became King Abdullah I, the first ruler of what would soon be called the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The question of Palestine, yet Jordan's story, was deeply tied to the struggles of its neighbors. In 1948, the creation of the State of Israel brought war to the region. Thousands of Palestinians fled across the Jordan River, seeking refuge. Many made Jordan their new home, joining the fabric of society, their stories forever part of Jordan's own. The Jordanian army fought in the War of 1948, known to Arabs as the Nakba, the catastrophe. In its aftermath, Jordan came to control the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, home to holy sites that carried the prayers of Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. Jordan had grown suddenly larger, its people more diverse, its challenges greater. Yet the kingdom endured. Kings and transitions. In 1951, tragedy struck. King Abdullah I was assassinated in Jerusalem. His life ended at the gates of Al-Aqsa Mosque. His grandson, Hussein, only a teenager at the time, would later ascend the throne after a brief regency. King Hussein would go on to rule Jordan for nearly half a century, guiding his nation through storms of conflict, waves of refugees, and the shifting sands of regional politics. His reign became one of resilience and survival. Jordan, in a turbulent region, the mid-20th century, was a time of turmoil for the Middle East. Wars erupted in 1956, 1967, and 1973. The Six-Day War of 1967 was especially devastating. Jordan lost the West Bank and East Jerusalem to Israel. The loss of Jerusalem was a heavy blow, and yet Jordan continued, its people adapting once again to a difficult reality. The years that followed brought both hardship and rebuilding. Waves of refugees arrived again after wars, settling in camps that grew into communities. Jordan's economy struggled, but its society showed resilience. Through all this, King Hussein worked tirelessly, balancing diplomacy and survival, seeking peace where he could, protecting his people as best as possible in a region of constant upheaval. The path to peace. In the 1990s, as the world shifted after the Cold War, Jordan made a bold move. In 1994, King Hussein signed a peace treaty with Israel, making Jordan the second Arab nation after Egypt to do so. It was a controversial decision, but one rooted in the hope of stability, of security, of a future less burdened by war. Peace did not solve every problem, but it brought a quieter border, new opportunities, and international recognition of Jordan's role as a mediator, and a voice of reason in a divided region. A modern kingdom. When King Hussein passed away in 1999, his son, King Abdullah II, took the throne. Under his leadership, Jordan has sought to modernize, to adapt to a fast-changing world, while also holding firmly to its traditions. Today, Jordan is known not for riches of oil or vast armies, but for its stability in a region often shaken by conflict. It is a land of hospitality, where refugees from many wars, Palestinians, Iraqis, Syrians, have found shelter. It is a land of ancient wonders, from Petra to Jerash, where history whispers through stone. It is a land of quiet strength, its deserts and valleys holding the memory of countless civilizations. A gentle reflection. As you lie back and listen, think of Jordan's journey, from the prehistoric villages of Ain Ghazal to the Nabatean kingdom of Petra, to the Roman cities that once glittered under the sun, through the storms of crusaders and the watchful towers of Mamluks, through the long quiet of the Ottoman centuries, to the rising of a modern kingdom, steady and enduring. Jordan is not a vast empire. It is not a land of endless wealth, but it is a land of survival, of continuity, of quiet resilience, closing the circle. And so the story comes full circle. The people of Jordan, who who once watched empires rise and fall around them, now live in a nation of their own. The Hashemite kingdom stands, small yet strong, a bridge between past and future, between tradition and change. The desert wind still sighs over the hills. The stars still shine over Petra, over Ammon, over the Jordan Valley. And the story of this land, like the flow of the river itself, continues onward, calm, patient, eternal.